Good evening, all. In the City of Salem, the City Council Committee on Administration and Finance. Hold on. Yeah. Try this again. Is that better? Okay, great. In the City of Salem, the City Council Committee on Administration and Finance, co-posted with the Committee of the Whole, met in the Council Chamber on Tuesday, March 26th, 2024 at 6 p.m. for the purpose of discussing item number 115, authorizing the mayor to enter into an intergovernmental agreement with the City of Beverly and the town of Danvers for the purpose of utilizing a $2.3 million grant from the Federal Transit Authority to establish a 2-year pilot program to implement and operate new regional, node-based, and flexible stop route transit service for residents of Salem, Beverly, and Danvers. Notice of this meeting was posted on March 21st, 2024 at 2:35 p.m. This meeting is being recorded, and with us in attendance tonight from the Committee of Administration and Finance is Councilor Churslow, Councilor Prosnewski, Councilor Stott, and Councilor Varela. And we also have from the Committee of the Whole, Councilor Harvey, Councilor Marcillo, Councilor Hapworth, and Councilor Cohen. Joining us remotely is Dave Kucharski, Director of Traffic and Parking. The City of Salem, along with Beverly and Danvers, were awarded $2.3 million from the FTA to expand the Skipper program. We have in front of us, as just stated, an authorization for the mayor to enter into an agreement with Beverly and Danvers to utilize the $2.3 million in grant funding to expand the Skipper transportation service to Beverly and Danvers. You all have in front of you the backup documentation with the information, including the actual agreement, breakdown of costs, the map of the extended Skipper area, and proposed hours of operation. And this information has been available to the public as well through the agenda. I will be taking public comment after questions from the councilors. The Salem Skipper on-demand, low-cost rideshare service has been very successful and currently operates only in Salem. I take it myself. This is an opportunity to expand that service with a pilot program that will operate for 1 year with an option for a 1-year renewal. Additional vehicles will be parked in Beverly and Danvers. And I asked our finance director about what would be the source of our expected financial contribution, which would be $1 million each year. And Salem will contribute our portion using ARPA funds. And if it's extended for another year, that would mean 2 years, $2 million in ARPA funds. I want to say thank you to Mr. Kucharski for joining us and also for providing all the information and his work on this expansion proposal. And I also wanted to make sure, Mr. Kucharski, if you could hear us and mute yourself just so I check that you're on. Okay, great. Thank you. And I would turn him up with this when he needs to chat. Okay, great. So at this time, I will open the meeting up to questions from the councilors. Councilor Stott.
Thank you, Chair Merkel. My first question is, I think, an obvious one is why this might be for Mr. Kucharski through you. Why is PBD not included in this program?
We had discussions with them after being notified about the award, and they chose not to participate, but they were given the opportunity.
Thank you. I just had to turn your volume up. Could you just repeat that? Thank you.
Sure. We did have discussions with them when we first learned of the award, and they had the opportunity to participate. They chose not to.
That's unfortunate. Okay, thank you. So I have a few more questions specific to the locations that were chosen and then the timing and hours around it. If you could provide some, I guess, maybe context first. I don't necessarily have any specific questions other than wondering what the data was used or the methodology used to pick the areas specifically. I mean, obviously, Beverly is all of downtown Beverly, it looks like, plus the Cherry Hill Office Park, which I worked at for years, so that would have been very convenient for me. But I'm not quite sure of the other areas that are on there. So if you could maybe explain the methodology along with the timing.
So when we applied for this grant, the idea was to try to help focus workforce transit as well as training. So the thought was including Danvers to certainly get access to Essex Tech and North Shore Community, as well as to the Cherry Hill that I believe straddles both Danvers and Beverly. It's a large employee center, which has currently no transit today. The agreement obviously maintains covering all of Salem, which has been the case since we started the program. The other locations in Danvers and Beverly was provided by my colleagues in those communities. A lot of it had to do with around the downtown of Beverly, other employment centers, the hospitals near to other maybe municipal areas. So they provided that to us, and we worked with the VIA team to figure out the additional vehicles that would be needed to cover those. In terms of the service hours, our service hours do not change, and the service hours for the other two communities are 7 to 7. That was just seen as a way to provide good coverage and work within the confines of the grant and what the three communities can also contribute towards that.
Thank you, if I may. Echo. Money-wise, we're definitely putting a larger piece into this pie for the budget, and we do have larger coverage area. But I think the number one not complaint, but concern that I get from residents that use the Skipper is that it's not always available, or you definitely can't use it during busy times, or there's a very long wait for it. I wouldn't want to have the additional extended service, which I think is great and definitely need it. And, we need to get to the next step of what is the Skipper and what is our regional transportation. But what are the checkpoints, I guess, or the monitoring that will be in place to ensure that the Salem level of service is not going to decrease with the addition of these additional services and locations?
So we're going to be adding an additional 5 vehicles to the overall program on top of the vehicles that are currently serving the city. We'll also be working with VIA on how those are deployed and getting additional drivers and service hours added to. So when I say service hours, I mean more drivers per hour, not extending hours, just having more drivers on the road during those peak times. And given the amount of data that VIA, the vendor who provides the service, has collected over the last few years, they have a good sense of what the Salem needs are, and we'll be following those in Beverly and Danvers with that. There will be adjustments, like any service when you're starting out, but we meet with them weekly. We've already started having just meetings with Beverly and Danvers, and we'll be doing that to tweak things and improve and figure out. And we shift hours perhaps during certain times of day where you may not need as many drivers on the road, and move those times where we're seeing more demand. So that's an ongoing thing that we'll be working with. Currently, we're seeing ETAs of 25 minutes, depending on time of day, which we want to obviously maintain that. So again, we'll be working with VIA and the other communities to follow that as we launch the service.
Thank you, Chair. One more question, especially with the locations that are kind of, I think, further out from our core service area. Have there been any discussions on, I don't even know what this would be called, like ride sharing? So we're not just driving one person or two people, like discussions on kind of getting it's a scheduled shuttle I'm kind of thinking of right now, but more regulated times back and forth to those. Have there been any conversations on possibly how to do something like that to make it more efficient for the rides, for especially the office parks, or definitely North Shore Community College, which is kind of the furthest out?
So because at least in the other communities, it is very specific areas. We think that there'll be trends where people will know certain times to take those trips in and out of those areas. The algorithm that VIA uses, the whole intent of it is to maximize travel times and ride sharing. So right now with our own service, we're seeing about 51% of the rides are two or more people in the rides going to either the same destination or a similar destination. So that'll be part of it. Again, as we track and we're seeing certain trends, we can have those discussions with VIA to see if we wanted to have more of a, I wouldn't call it a fixed route, but more of a standard time and route that we'd want to use it if we were seeing those trends. But again, there's a lot of robust data that VIA is able to track, and we will certainly look at that.
I think it's my last one, I promise. So that's great. So you actually answered my second question. So it's interesting that 51% of the rides are shared. As someone that uses Lyft and Uber for work travel a lot, I can schedule those rides. Is that a feature that's available on the VIA app or the Skipper app? Because that would definitely help with the ride sharing portion.
It's not intended for booking ahead. It's more for when you need it. If you're aware of wait times, certain times a day, you're encouraged to try to book it at a certain time, but there's no pre-booking associated with this service.
I'll stop now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stott. I can offer my own brief observation too, as someone that takes it quite often. It seems it's going to be work in the same format. It does seem to be an efficient system of picking other people up and dropping people off. Pretty much every time I take it, somebody's getting picked up, and then somebody's already there, or they're dropped off. So it does seem to efficiently organize and the drop-offs and pickups of the passengers. Also, to something that's helpful for anybody listening that takes the Skipper, to start checking quite a bit of time ahead to kind of get a feel of the wait time. That's helpful too, because it will send you 45 minutes out or things. It will tell you what your wait time is, and that can be helpful to kind of gauge when you should jump into the fold. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Varela.
Thank you, Chair Merkel. Through you to Mr. Kucharski. Looking at the breakdown of the other cities and towns, Danvers and Beverly, I see that obviously it's significantly different from the investment in Salem. I guess my question to you is this kind of the opportunity for Danvers and Beverly to get their feet wet and just see how this goes, and they might be willing to look into this further or offer a little more investment into this?
Yes, that's the hope. And as part of that, we'll also be engaging the private sector in those communities. We've had some preliminary discussions with the college. We do have letters of support from a lot of Cherry Hill businesses in the chamber. A letter doesn't cost anything, but we're hoping that as they see that this service is being used and the benefit to it, that we can have more of those discussions and work with the leaders in each of the communities to have more partnership with those institutions.
Thank you.
Councillor Prosnowski.
Thank you, Chair Merkel. Through you to Director Kucharski. David, I'm looking at the map over here, and it appears to me, besides downtown Beverly, that riders are accessing other parts. Those are primarily medical offices and medical places, or is it something else besides that? I'm specifically looking like at the Danvers area and the Cherry Hill area, and that northwestern part of Danvers.
There are medical facilities, but there's also the Cherry Hill district, which is a major employment area. It's a large industrial park that has a lot of large employers. As I mentioned earlier, with really, there's no transit, there's no T service, there's no other RTA service that goes there. And we've had discussions with Mass Hire and other entities on the challenge of getting workers to those sites. It also includes the mall in Danvers and some other health clinics that might be peppered into each community.
Those two little spots in the northwest corner, I don't know if you have the map available for you, but there's two tiny spots. They look like it could be somewhere around Route 1. Could you tell me what those are?
Give me a moment. I might be able to pull up specifically.
Both sides.
So one of them is the North Shore Community College campus, one of their campuses off Route 1.
Mm-hmm.
And the others is a Leahy outpatient.
Right. So that just brings me to my last question. If somebody is ride sharing and they want to stop along the route, does the skipper or the skippers make a stop? Somebody wants to get off, for instance, in downtown Danvers, if it's going that way, or is this just a one destination you have to?
So when you book a trip, you put in your origin and your destination, and it has to meet the parameters set by the algorithm. So if you're saying I want to go to a spot that's not within the geofenced areas, it will tell you unavailable. So for the Beverly and Danvers, it has to be specific. Also, for a resident in Salem who's looking to go to one of these destinations, they have to choose one that's essentially within the zones that we've identified.
So someone going on Endicott Street and towards MGH or the Liberty Tree Mall, could they make a stop off at BJ's? Could it be dropped off there? Or would they have to take it to MGH and then get off there?
Only if BJ was in the geofence. I don't believe it is. The downtown of Danvers is. So it does have its limits, but that, again, is when we were talking to Beverly and Danvers and their funding, that what they were able to contribute, that's why we had to limit it in these ways, as well as with the service hours. So the hope is that as they see that the benefit to it and the residents see it, they might be more inclined to expand it. Of course, that would involve additional funding coming from the community.
So even if it's along the route, the driver will not stop to drop someone off. Is that correct?
Correct, unless it's a stop along the way that is in the geofenced area. Yeah, that's the intent.
Okay.
But again, we maximize the time. The driver should not be stopping if someone's asking. If there's emergency, obviously, but the intent is that when you book your trip, you're booking it in an origin and destination that is in the parameters of the software.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilor Marcillo?
Thank you, Chair. Not being a member of the committee. Mr. Kucharski, could you give a little bit more information about how you arrived at these different locations in Danvers and Beverly? And specifically, it looks more like we're trying to get Salem residents to the schools and to businesses rather than medical facilities in Danvers. And then additionally, I noticed that I believe the whole downtown is on this in Beverly, but the time is restricted to 7 p.m. So if somebody wanted to take this to go out for a meal in Beverly from Salem, you're kind of time constrained in that way. So can you talk more about where the data came from for which points you were focusing on for the different locations in the other communities?
So we started with employment centers and we started with educational centers, facilities within those respective communities. And then with our discussions with Beverly and Danvers, they identified other locations that could fit within the parameters of the funding that we had. obviously the downtown of each community. There are some medical areas that they've identified, hospitals, and with the goal of trying to cover as much as we could. And again, limiting the hours is part of the funding. And for them, it's like the counselor said, they're getting their feet wet. This is going to be new to them, and this is sort of how we're laying it out right now. We're hoping that it becomes popular. We're able to get additional funding either through other federal or state grants as well as from the private sector. But that's really sort of how these were determined at this point. And we have the ability to refence areas if we're finding that some of these locations are getting more demand. We could work with VIA on that. And if we're finding that some areas are not getting any, we can potentially remove them from the area and allow the trips to be going somewhere else.
Thank you. I appreciate that. My next question is, when do you know that this is successful to the point where we've outgrown this kind of a ride share and it maybe deserves more of a scheduled minibus sort of approach? And what made me think of that was the article in the Salem News where I believe it was the mayor of Beverly might have said that this was a great solution for people taking the train in and getting to either the Cummings Center, or I could see the Cherry Hill office parks, which seems like a no-brainer to me and seems like something that those businesses should be helping to coordinate on a larger scale if they have employees coming in, or if they want to encourage employees to come in on the train. And so if we see a lot of this is part two, if we see a lot of people utilizing this shuttle to go to specific places in Danvers and Beverly routinely, when does this grow into a larger thing than just a minivan?
So one of the hopes with this grant is to show the state and others that not only this type of service can work in these communities, but also where there might be opportunities to reintroduce fixed route services to show that there is a demand there. I think that's a bigger discussion that would involve the state at that point. Right now, we're working with the confines of these types of vehicles. If we go to a larger one, there's different parameters and obviously costs associated with something like that. But the data that we are gathering, the hope is that we continue to have discussions with state and federal partners and the private sector to show that there's definitely a need for this, and how I don't think it should be Salem alone trying to address these issues, but I think we're at least trying to show the state that this can work. And I think that's why we were awarded the grant, working with Congressman Moulton's office. I'd also say that the state is also looking at this more in earnest because they're retrofitting some of their grants for multimodal on-demand transit as opposed to just fixed route. And we've been chasing those grants, and we're waiting to hear back. So I think it's a matter of try it out and see what happens, and continue to have those conversations based on the findings of how are people using this.
Okay. One more question. And I got an email before I came, and it's an email or a question that's raised all the time when we talk about the skipper. Can you talk about why the vehicles are not registered in Massachusetts, and what kind of what they have to do in Massachusetts before they're used in this capacity?
So VIA works with Avis. They lease the cars from Avis. Avis has all the inspections, all the permitting is done through Massachusetts so that they could be driven on Massachusetts roads. It's like a rental vehicle. They are still paying inspection fees and others to have these vehicles here. That's how it's been explained to me, and we've been using it that way. It is a local Avis location. that's providing the vehicles, and they don't always have every vehicle registered in the state. But again, they're paying inspection and other permits to operate in the state.
Thank you.
Councilor Prosnowski?
Thank you, Chair, to David Kuchowski. David, we do background checks on our taxi and livery drivers. Who does the background checks on the skipper drivers?
VIA does that. They do Corey checks, full checks on all the drivers, and do training with the drivers before they're onboarded. I'd also note that VIA is permitted through the state as a transportation network company similar to Uber Lyft, so that they have reviews and permitting that they have to comply with that regulatory authority as well at the state level.
Thank you.
Councilor Stott?
Thank you, Chair. I had one comment. If and when we do go live, I would definitely hope we have a more illustrative map of the extended areas, because this one is just kind of confusing. So that's just, it's not confusing. It's just, it's difficult to understand the overlay and what areas the services cover. So I would just recommend adding streets on there for public. I did have also another kind of comment or request or question about, this is a two-year request. You're going to be, I'm assuming, looking at the data. We've talked about this as the project is going along. Will any of that be reported out or back to council, or could we maybe make a request? I'm kind of formulating this in my brain as we go, but perhaps make a request to report out to council in 1 year, similar to what we did with the, was it ADUs? It's similar to what we did with the ADU amendment that we made about, in 1 year to report back on the change. I would love to see a check-in, because yes, it's a try and see, and hopefully this works, but it's an expensive try and see, and hopefully it works. So I'd like to see the results or some sort of data, maybe 6 months or a year, I would love to hear what my other fellow councilors think about that, but a report back into council at that time. If you were already planning it, that's great. But if not, then I would like to possibly make a motion to request that.
Mr. Jakarski, is that something that's feasible to do? How soon out into the program were you planning to kind of look at the data and see, or is it fluid and it's something you'll regularly be doing, and maybe a 6-month marker to check back in on it is feasible? What do you think is the best path forward for that?
I mean, it is fluid, and like I said, we meet with them weekly, and we plan on meeting with the other two communities once we launch, probably on a bi-monthly basis. We do performance reports that we put out at times through social media, but I can see us reporting in a year some of the findings. I don't see that being too heavy a lift, and we can work with our partners at VIA to help prepare that. If there's specific things that the council is looking for, I'd appreciate it if you could let us know ahead of time.
So maybe before the next year's funding is to go through, we could have a check-in with the our A&F committee before we commit to another year. Would that be feasible?
Just to clarify, is the council need to do this again? Or I thought the order was to cover the 2 years. I'm happy to come back in a year and report. I just don't know if that's, my understanding was that the approval would cover the 2 years.
Yes, the approval, this is for to establish a 2-year pilot program. So you are correct. That is what we are voting on tonight, as it says here. That the purpose of what we're authorizing the mayor to enter in, to a reminder for everyone, that this is to enter into an intergovernmental agreement to utilize the $2.3 million grant from the FTA to establish a 2-year pilot program. and to implement and operate new regional node base. So yes, the approval is for 2 years. So it would just be a request to have some reporting.
Okay, so I would make a motion that, I mean, I don't want to stop the conversation, but I guess my motion to get this out of committee or to return it back to committee would be to refer it back to council, that the order be approved for adoption, and that in an additional order to report back to council in 10 months prior to the renewal, because there is a renewal in this contract after the first year. So prior to the renewal of the second year, that the council receive a report on usage.
Mr. Jaworski, would that be problematic for the agreement? To make
It's two separate things. I could do two separate.
It's two separate orders. Okay.
You're just asking to come back at 10 months after this expansion launches to report on the data, essentially?
Yes, so Councilor Stott, the request is to come back in 10 months with a report and then it would be an additional order to come back. So this would be approved as is, and then it would be an additional order to come back with some data in 10 months.
Sorry, yes, that would be my motion as a committee member to, have this go back approved, the order, but then I would also request a second order for the report prior to the agreement renewal. So I don't want to say, 10 months or whatever, because who knows when the agreement will actually be finalized, but prior to the agreement renewal.
Thank you. Councilor Varela?
Thank you, Chair Merkel. I'd like to second that motion, only because I did have a question as well through you to Mr. Kucharski. Within a year, I'd like to see, I know you talked about how the geofencing of the proximity of the zones with Beverly and Danvers could possibly change. And I guess my final request or question before we move on here is, when it comes to that geofencing, is it kind of up to you and as well as Darlene Wynn and Aaron Henry as far as that geofencing? Because I think that after looking at the map, I really think that there's a missed opportunity with the entire Ryleside neighborhood in Beverly not being in the mix. I know I'm not a city councilor for Beverly, but there's a lot of residents that live there that could access the skipper. And it's such in close proximity to the Kernwood Bridge. It just seems like when we're sharing vehicles, it seems like it just would be a no-brainer to have that. I know I'm not going to speak for Ms. Wynn or Mr. Henry, but I guess my question is, can that be changed when you guys are starting to look at where the rights are actually going?
Yeah, I would not rule anything out. I think we could certainly evaluate it. Just like when we started it in Salem, we had it during certain hours. We covered the entire city, but we had it within certain hours, and we extended that based on when we were seeing demand for it. So there's information even when someone tries to use the app and it may not be available. So we can look at that with VIA and help determine that. Again, making sure that we're not stretching the service too much. The goal is to make sure that we're keeping ETAs at a certain level of service. So that would need to be factored in. But VIA loves data, so they're always reporting back to us what's utilization, where they're seeing the demand, the hours, and they themselves are reassigning their drivers. So they may have 4 serving this particular peak hour, and then they change shifts around. So that's an ongoing thing. It's a pretty dynamic the way they do it. So the short answer is yes, we will certainly look at that.
Thank you. So I guess in short, just so I'm clear, when it comes to this geofencing that you guys have proposed on this map, that could change with a moment's notice based on data, correct?
Yes, I think it would likely be a discussion that we as city town staff have, and then I'm sure, approach the mayors or the town administrators, depending on the level of the change that's being, suggested.
You all set, Councilor? Councilor Marcelo?
Thank you, Chair. Dave, what is the, granularity of the data that you get? Do you get information on people who attempt to book a ride but find nothing available and therefore have to leave the app? Do you get that kind of information?
We do get unmet demand, people who try and don't book. We get information on when people are trying to book outside service hours. So it does vary. It does get pretty granular, and like I said, it helps FIA to pinpoint the service hours.
So I guess some of the complaints that we've been hearing is that Salem already can't meet the demand for the skipper. Do you have any sort of data on that? The percentage of people that try to book a ride but can't?
We do have the unmet demand that FIA provides to us on a weekly basis. So of all the trips that are attempted, how many are met and how many are unmet?
Do you find that that's rising, that number?
We were seeing a trend go up, and then FIA adjusted their hours and it dropped back down.
Okay.
There are other factors. It could be time of year. It could be weather. So that it varies. There's other variables outside of this, the number of drivers on the road. But when they see those trends, they do make adjustments. It's just getting the drivers, booking those times with them to make sure they have them on the roads.
Thank you.
Councilor Harvey?
Thank you, Madam Chair, not being a member of the committee. One question I have is, reading in this article, on this paragraph here, it seems like Salem handles all the clerical work for this. We invoice Beverly, we invoice Danvers, we submit all the invoices to get reimbursement from the FTA. How much time, if you know, does that take one of our city employees to do? And if so, how much are we getting reimbursed for that person's time for this?
It's been mainly me and some of my staff that have been working with the FTA to set this up, including Ms. Friedman and Ms. Renard. That was sort of the front end. Once that is in place, I don't envision it taking up too much time. There's a portal that the FTA provides that's been established, and it's mainly filing paperwork and then resubmitting it. So I don't envision it becoming too much of an administrative hardship, but this is the first time we're doing this. So if it is, I say we'd have to, revisit, but it'd be something to certainly we'd have to consider depending on the success of the program and how it grows or changes.
Yeah, I guess the only reason I'm asking that question is because it looks like Salem's putting in a lot more money than Danvers and Beverly, but we're also taking on the burden of all the clerical work for this program too.
True. I think the fact that we had this service established, we put together the RFP to maintain our core service with the addendum to do the expansion. We've signed the contract directly with the vendor. So if things don't work out, we would still have our service, which I think the city would want. I think that's part of the way we framed it. It could change over time. Ideally, I'd like to get to a point where this is a state program that's run by the state. It's challenging to run. This is like running a mini RTA. But I think, again, we're showing the state, the feds, that this can work. I think it's worth trying. So.
Mr. Chikarsky, I had a question. Let me turn that down as well. So when you and the other municipalities examine the data and maybe change, the hours or where stops are and things of that nature, and also, as Councilor Harvey pointed out, how much of a heavy lift it is for staff, would the expected contributions possibly change for the second year of the program with with our neighbors?
I would say only if they're asking for additional service and they're willing to cover the cost of that, because the grant money will not change over the 2-year period. It would need to either come from communities or the private sector within those communities if they're looking to add to it. I am looking for additional grants. But my intent is for those, if we do get those, they would be for service hours within Salem to serve the city and the residents. It wouldn't necessarily be towards the overall service, but to especially during busier season. But I'm still waiting to hear back from the state on that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. I don't see anybody here. I had said that I would take public. Oh, I'm sorry. You said? Oh, okay. Yeah, I had said at the beginning of the meeting I would take public comment, and I just want to check the attendees. I don't see anybody in the hall, but let me just check the attendees. There is no one on Zoom, so if there's nothing else, we do have a new motion for a second order in front of us. Councillor Stott motioned for traffic and parking to come back to the City Council with reporting on data and how the program enhancement is going in general, and some feedback, and at a time before it's the renewal for the second year of the program. So an estimate would be about 10 months. And that was seconded by Councilor Varela. Any further discussion or questions? So I will ask, and then we still have our regular order that we will vote on. So for the A&F committee, all those in favor? Great. All those opposed, showing no hands. This passes. Four committee members plus my own. So this motion passes 5-0. Do I have another motion? Councilor Varela?
I'll take that one.
Okay. Councilor Stott.
I would like to make a motion that the committee refer this back with the recommendation for adoption.
Second.
Okay, so Councilor Stott motions for us to refer back to the full council with a positive recommendation authorizing the mayor to enter into an intergovernmental agreement with Beverly and Danvers to utilize the $2.3 million grant for the expansion of the Skipper program. We have a second from Councilor Varela. All those in the committee in favor? Okay. Any opposed? Okay, so I see 4 hands plus my own, so that passes as well. And we would need one more motion. Oh, Councilor Prosnowski.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, motion to adjourn. All those in favor? All those opposed? None? Thank you. So, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Kucharski. We appreciate all the data and all the work you've put into to continue a low-cost transportation option for our residents. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.